Hey everybody, welcome to your readings for the week. These are the readings for the week ending April 8th. Still have a retrograde free week. We are getting closer to that Mercury retrograde. It's coming this month, but we're not quite in the shadow period yet, so we don't really need to think about that yet, which is good. So planet wise, everything is moving forward, which is nice. Let's get to our list here and see how it affects each of you individually. I'm going to start with Darcy, as I usually do. Let's take a look. See here. No moon action this week, which is good. Mercury is going to move into Taurus this week, and the Mercury retrograde that is coming up is a Taurus retrograde. So almost like literally almost leave Taurus, and then it goes retrograde, and you have to deal with that. And then he goes through again, and then he's done. So unfortunately, a retrograde in your sign means you got a lot of Mercury going on for at least a couple of months there. So the good news is that as Mercury is moving into Taurus, Mercury's grand sextile with Mars and Saturn is really kind of a helpful aspect, if that makes sense. It brings these planets together for a specific purpose. Mercury comes in right on the cusp of focus on your career and focus on your support system. Mars is still sitting in that inner trauma, old anger, BS place, unfortunately. And then we have Saturn, which is focused on your long-term goals. So in many ways, I sort of see this playing out for you as a means of not just creating long-term goals or beefing up the long-term goals that you have, but really just sort of stepping outside of the challenges that we all kind of sort of create for ourselves, if that makes sense, in terms of being, other situations where we're let down by somebody, we're not feeling supported by other people. We can't do it if we're not supported by other people. We as human beings come up with like so many excuses, it's not even funny. So when you can identify where you are coming up with excuses, then you can also make the choice to approach the situation in a different way. And that just frees you up energetically to face your fears of what your goals will look like as you get there, and just do it anyways, because it could be a really fun adventure. Right at the end of the week, the moon moves into opposition with Mercury. We're just talking about Mercury, I'm sorry, Mercury and Uranus. And we also have Venus spending the last of her time in Taurus also. So for that one day and that one little opposition with the moon, of course, it's emotional. We're talking about support system. We're talking about a loving support system. Maybe we're even talking about a support system that we don't really know what it looks like because we don't have it. We never have, if that makes sense. So we're kind of coming up with all kinds of different ideas of what that should look like. And the moon being really focused on those that love you. So this always creates one of those scenarios where you think that the person that you've been supporting for a long time should be there to support you, and it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. And if this is a consistent pattern for you, as difficult and as painful and as challenging as it is to see that relationship for what it is, once you get past the pain and the anger and the grief over the fact that you can't change what it is, it does become a lot more freeing to not necessarily disconnect from that relationship, but to treat it for what it is, as in not putting all of your energy into it and not getting any of that energy back. You can still help people, but manage what you're doing, if that makes sense. Venus in Taurus for the rest of the week, right at the end of the week, we're at 27 degrees. So we'll have Venus into the first couple of days of next week, and then she moves on into Gemini. Having the Venus influence in your sign, first of all, it's your ruling planet. There's a lot of creativity there. There's also a lot of, I want to see love for what it is and not what I want it to be. And with her focus being on your support system throughout this whole entire trip that she's been on, it kind of feels to me like in some ways you're coming up with creative ideas to make changes. You're coming up with creative ideas in some cases for money, for work, creative ideas or creative things to do with certain friends of yours or people that you normally hang out with, just to kind of shake things up. And it feels like in some cases you've been trying to do this and it's worked out very well, and in other cases you have a lot of ideas that you just can't implement right now for various different reasons, like maybe being buried under snow. A lot of people are buried under snow right now. So bottom line is, just because you can't do it right now doesn't mean that you can't put it down, write it down on a list, put it on the back burner for later on when you can. Sometimes it just makes it easier to get through a dismal winter when you're making plans for tropical summers, and even just the act of making those plans does make things a little bit easier. So that is what I have for you this week, Darcy. And I'm going to move on to Kendra. We continue to have Venus in Taurus. This is the last full week of Venus in Taurus. Of course, we continue to have Uranus in Taurus. And this week, Mercury is going to move into Taurus. So we're starting to move into that. All the action is taking place in Taurus, as the sun is not quite ready to move into Taurus yet, but we're getting there. He ends at 18 degrees. So we literally, that's like a week and a half. And then it's Taurus season already, which is kind of crazy, but it is what it is. It's a whole time thing. Anyways, Mercury in Taurus, the influence of Mercury in Taurus is sort of significant as it comes into Taurus, cusping both your focus on career as well as your support system, and in line with, in a grand sextile with Mars and Saturn. Mars is still very much focused on our inner trauma. And when we're talking about Mars, we're specifically talking about anger issues and getting rid of those old anger issues. Of course, you and I both know is something that we really need to do in order to be able to progress forward. So that is a helpful aspect. Bringing your inner trauma into something doesn't always seem like it's helpful, but you and I both know that it is. And also, taking a part in this grand sextile is Saturn, and Saturn's focus is on your long-term goals and is being influenced by Pisces right now. Pisces and Mars are both in water signs, which adds an emotional element to what it is that you're doing. In some cases, I keep saying that this is helpful, and it is once you look at it, of course, in the right context. If you let it go and you let it flow, it's not standing in your way anymore. And it's actually quite interesting because I sort of had a mini breakdown recently where I was told that same thing. And I tell people this all the time, but when I'm being told, that's not what I want to hear. I want to hear, give me a fix for this problem right now. And of course, that's just not how it works, right? You already know what the fix is to the problem. And deep down, I already know what the fix is to the problem. So rather than avoiding what we don't want to see, in some situations, it's very necessary to see it in as black and white as possible. That makes sense. Venus's influence throughout the week adds a new level of creativity to your plans and specifically to your support system. So to me, that plays out a little bit like, in many cases, you have a more feminine support system. In some cases, this is more of a emotional and loving support system. And if this is not a support system that you have, this is the support system that you're creating currently at this time. Actually, I know you have this because you really have been creating this for a really long time. The issue I feel that always seems to come up, and this will be prevalent at the very end of the week, is the moon moves into opposition with Venus and Uranus, with the moon's focus being on those you love and these other planets being focused on those that support you. Those two don't always line up. So we women are constantly in this situation where we're going through something. The man is standing right there. He's the one that's supposed to support you. And he either doesn't know how, or he's too tired, or he doesn't understand. And there's like a million things, right? And we always go back to, how come he doesn't support me like I support him? Well, because he doesn't know how. Most of the time, they just don't know how. So this is a trigger of something else that happened where somebody didn't support you. It really isn't about him. And that's what is really important to be able to see clearly at this time, specifically at the end of the week when you have that opposition that's taking place there. So the week, honestly, I just want to say, to me, Venus's last week in your sign is you twirling with one of those thingies that, I can't think of the word, but it's a twirly thingy with the thing that twirls on it. It's just you dancing and creating magic wherever you go. And that's really the energy that you should be focused on throughout the week. And any of the other BS that comes up, not worth your energy. Plain and simple. If you have to deal with it as quickly as you possibly can and move on. And that is what I have for you this week. And I am going to move on to Jeannette. What do we got for Jeannette? Okay, so a couple of things. First of all, we have no planets in Gemini. Now, that is going to change next week because Venus is coming into Gemini, and that I really feel is going to be absolutely excellent for you because Venus has this just wonderful creative influence that is going to bring you a lot of brilliant ideas. And I just see you in your craft room going crazy. In fact, I feel like this week you're going to start to feel this already, this sort of, I want to make this and I want to make that, and just kind of going crazy on the stuff, right? But that's next week. Be prepared. We'll just put it this way. Go home. I know that you're right now, as I'm recording, you're here in California, but this is, of course, we're talking about next week when you get home. Get your crafting place in order so you can let those creative ideas flow, if that makes sense. This week, we have no planets to influence Gemini. We continue to be focused on that trauma space. Honestly, it really feels like this has been the focus for Gemini for such a long time. And as individuals, this happens to us a lot, whether the zodiac is on the focus of it or not. We just get stuck in this space where the same things keep coming up over and over and over again. And it's the same things that trip you up over and over and over again. And it's really frustrating when that happens. Absolutely uber frustrating when that happens. And every time it happens to me, well, I'm always cursing everybody else for making it happen. But the truth is that I'm actually the one that's making it happen in some way, shape, or form. And so, as deep and painful as it is to sit down and really look at the situation absolutely, honestly, and in black and white for what it is, and the changes that you need to make inside of you is so not fun. But there's liberation in that, because there's power in that. Because as you identify where you can make changes, it puts the power back in your hands rather than somebody else's. And I'm not accusing you of pointing the fingers, of course. However, I will say this, that if something keeps repeating itself, if an argument with your husband keeps repeating itself, if a conversation with your kids keeps repeating itself, things repeat themselves for a reason. And we have to take ourselves out of that, this is what they're doing to me, and reflect that back on, what do I need to change in order to help change the situation, if that makes sense. Honestly, the more you do that, the easier it is to actually just get through the situation and then move on to whatever the next thing is, because there's going to be another one. The other thing that I'm sort of seeing for you this week is there's something about miscommunication coming up. I'm not sure exactly where this miscommunication is coming up. I mean, it could be, in terms of paperwork, in terms of the doctor's offices, in terms of all the different offices that you have to deal with right now. It could be between you and your husband. It could be between you and the lady at the pharmacy. I mean, just be aware of miscommunication. And I think the reason why this is coming up is because I feel like this could happen at a time where you're already really irritated, and it's a mistake. That's all it is a silly little mistake. It's not something that's being done to you on purpose. So it may trigger something that you may want to react to, but you might not want to do that either, because you're going to feel bad afterwards. We'll just put it that way. Not to say that, you're mean or anything like that. It's just, I always feel bad afterwards. That makes sense. So that's what I have for you. And I am going to move on to Connie. But no planets in Leo this week. No moon, because that was last week, and we'll just leave last week in last week. Leave the past in the past, right? At least that one. We do continue to have the Lilith in your sign, and she moves direct. So we're starting off the week with her in retrograde. And then about the middle of the week, Tuesday, Wednesday, she starts to move direct again. So her energy sort of wobbles and changes. The other interesting thing about her placement is she sort of starts off the week very much focused on the past in retrograde. And then she moves, and as she moves, her focus becomes on self instead of the past. And there's one or two things that can come out of this. One, it's sort of looking back on the circumstances that you've been through in order to understand how the person that you are now was built. There's also, in some cases, an opportunity. We're talking about, with the Lilith, we're talking about change and the ability to make change. And when we're retrograde, we're reflecting that back at ourselves. So this is really a lesson in, how am I getting in the way of making the changes that I want to make, regardless of where those changes are coming from. And then all of a sudden, boom, we go direct. And rather than holding back the change, we're getting ready to make the change. And it's almost, I sort of visualize this as you in your warrior costume saying, that's it, taking this over. I'm taking control of this. I don't know what that is per se. I feel like some of that has to do with your business. I feel like some of that has to do with family situations. I feel like some of that has to do with changes you're making in yourself, right? Like the eating thing, for example. One day you just said, that's it. I'm taking control of the situation, and put yourself on a diet or whatever. Not a diet as in to lose weight, but a regimen of food, I guess. Something along those lines. And when that retrograde ends and things start to move direct, it is going to feel like things open up to be able to be fluid again, so that there isn't so many roadblocks to being able to get anywhere, if that makes sense, which is definitely a good thing. As she moves through the week, we go back to being focused on the past. And what's interesting about this is that you'll find when you look back in the past that there are instances where you could have moved forward, and for whatever reason you were held back, whether it was you, whether it was your family, whether it was your husband, whether it was whoever it was, right? The point is, you're looking at that situation to learn what held you back, so you can make sure that it doesn't hold you back this time. And that's where that past experience is very necessary. Looking back on those past experiences becomes necessary in order to achieve that goal. Otherwise, well, you just don't do it. It's as simple as that. The other thing that I'm picking up, besides allergy season, the other thing that I'm picking up for you this week is I see a client that the only way I can describe it is that everything you have to do for this man is like a puzzle, and you have to hunt down the puzzle pieces in order to put the entire puzzle together, which sort of seems like a pain in the butt. But Frankie is also saying that it'll be worth it. And I don't understand. But Frankie keeps showing me a wiener dog. So I don't know if maybe it has to do with this client. Or there's something with a client that might have a dog like this that you need to pay attention to. And it's like a little thing that may slip by, if that makes sense, like a little piece of information that, oops, I didn't realize you needed this information, and it just sort of omitted it, or something along those lines. There's something specific about this client that has the dog that you want to pay very deep attention to, and when you get there, you'll know why. That makes sense. That's what I have for you, Connie. I'm gonna take a little mini break here real quick while things sort of quiet down, and then I'll get back to the recording. Okay, moving on to Jenny. We don't have any major planets in Leo this week, which is good because we don't need them right now. We continue to have the dark moon influencing Leo, and actually her placement is interesting. She's still retrograde until about Tuesday or Wednesday, and then she moves direct. And she starts off with this sort of a focus on the past, moves towards a focus on self, back to a focus on past in this whole week span. And 2 things I feel come up for you on that. One is we have one more week and a handful of days, right? So you're down to the wire. And on one hand, I feel like you're dealing with stuff that maybe you're looking at and going, I'm so glad I won't have to deal with this anymore after this. Like it's somebody else's problem and not mine. The other thing that I'm sort of picking up on with that is I feel like lately it's felt like there's a lot of blocks and you can't dig yourself out of all of the paperwork, but it's going to feel like things start to move and move and move this week. And rather than the blockade, it's sort of trying to keep up with the movement, if that makes sense. Because it's just, it's going like crazy. The dark moon is really all about being able to make changes. So in retrograde, it kind of feels like you're stagnant and having a hard time with that. When she moves direct, it's almost like being shot out of a cannon. Like you go from I can't make changes to hey, I can make as many changes as I want, kind of a thing. But it also feels like it releases some of those roadblocks and some of those things that have been slowing you down, like the weather, freaking power going out, all the other probably ridiculous stuff that I don't know about that you've been going through, because I'm sure you've had quite enough of it. We'll put it that way. I've had quite enough of it too. I'm right there with you on all of it. As far as the weather is concerned, it can kick rocks at this point. I'm done with it. The other thing that I feel is coming up for you this week, which is really bad timing because it's so not like you have any time for this BS at all. But it's almost like I get the feeling that something from the past is coming to haunt you again in some way. And it's kind of a stupid thing. This isn't like, you murdered somebody and they finally caught up with you or anything like that. It's more of an annoyance thing. It's more of a, why is this coming up now? I don't have time for this shit. And to be honest with you, I think that's exactly what you should say when it comes up. But I mean, you know what? You do you. However you want to handle it is fine. But honestly, I think this is coming up because you need to know that whatever it is, it nowhere near holds the power that someone thinks it does over you anymore. And you've tried to be nice and you've tried to be diplomatic and you've tried to do it all kinds of different ways. And this time you just may have to put your bitch boots on and show them who you're dealing with. So that sounds like fun. And that's what I have for you this week. Don't worry, because you're badass and you always are, and every year you manage to do it, even though it looks like there's no possible way that you're going to do it. But I know that you're going to do it. You've dealt with worse, right? So good luck. I'm sending you lots and lots of good juju. Okay, moving on to, who am I moving on to? I think I'm moving on to Linda. Hey there, Linda. So we are going to kick off the week with the moon in Virgo. Because why not? Focus is on, okay, well, focus is on your home because we still continue to have a Ceres influence, which is bringing that focus in a little bit more prominently also. But we are going to bring an influence of your mind and how you think into this. Specifically, the moon is bringing this emotional thought process up to the forefront this week, which is not exactly like, oh, yay, I'm so excited about that. And we're going to kick off the moon being in your sign in an opposition with Saturn, which is focused on long-term goals. So I kind of feel that the way that this is going to play out for you a little bit is let me put it this way, because this is the way it's being given to me. The more you try to micromanage the goal, the more it won't fit together, if that makes sense. And the micromanagement is coming from here. You're overthinking it. Okay. So it's a good idea to take the time to take a step back and just sort of, kind of let it go and let it be, and then come back to it, if that makes sense. The other thing is the moon is in a grand sextile with Pluto as well as Mars. Mars is all about old anger right now, and the release of this old anger, which is annoying at best, okay? But it's lining up in a helpful way, because it is helpful, because Jupiter's focus is on career. Jupiter's all about expansion and growth. You got to get rid of this crap if you're going to move forward. We both know that, right? So I feel like in many cases, you have the tendency, which is very similar to a tendency that I have, to put off these releases, and because you're busy, you've got work to do, you've got a family to take care of, you go to all of these things, the moon's going to come in and go, guess what? None of that's going to work. We're going to make you deal with this, which is not exactly pleasant, but by doing so, you release it. And when you release it, more doors are going to open up for you. We'll put it that way. The moon moves into opposition with Neptune the next day. Again, we're focused on how you think and the emotional thought process, in opposition with Neptune, which is right on the cusp of career and long-term goals. So we're specifically looking at long-term career goals here. Now, I feel like this emotion also, there's a panickiness to it. So the micromanagement, the word control also comes up with that as well. You don't want to put worries over how the outcome is going to be into the outcome. And this is the moon and the planet of intuition not working with each other. These are very emotional planets that are in opposition with each other. That means you're blocking your intuition by trying to micromanage the situation. So interesting that this comes up right at the beginning of the week, because it just feels like, here it is, and I'm trying to put it together, and I'm having all of these issues, and none of these people are helpful at all. And then all of a sudden you realize, okay, I'm way too emotionally invested in this right now, and that's the problem. It's the sooner you get to that point, the easier it is from there on out. And as the moon moves out of your sign, that will calm way down, because by Tuesday the moon is gone. It's moved on to go plague somebody else. But we still continue to have Ceres influencing your sign, because Ceres is retrograde and moving back into your sign. And we have that sort of maternal influence retrograded back at us still. I say us like I'm in there with you, and I'm not. But the way that I sort of see that playing out for you, because it is very much focused, it is focused on the home, but it's also focused, it moves into focus on how you think. And to start off the week with an emotional thought process, this actually is pointing towards, where are you nurturing your own mind? Are you just giving out all the information and not allowing new information back in? I think people in the leadership realm tend to forget this more than others, right? But you and I both know that a good leader is constantly learning. And for you, that creates an imbalance if you're not, if that makes sense. So that may be something interesting to look into, because that is part of how you nurture your mind and keep it focused, so that you can continue to run all of these wonderful things that you do. So making sure that you are nurturing your mind, nurturing your spirituality, continuing to have that balance, especially after you've had this crazy move, really important. And that's what I have for you. And I'm moving on to Matalyn. I almost got that all over myself, and you almost got to see it. Okay, so we're going to kick off the week with the moon in Virgo for the first 2 days of the week, Sunday and Monday. The moon's focus is on the mind. It's how your mind works. And when you've got the moon influencing how your mind works, usually it's a circumstance that throws you into that emotional, you can call it roller coaster, you can call it a tornado, you can call it a carousel. I've called it a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but it's when you are looping around in an emotional situation that you will not let go of your anger over. And we all have about a bazillion of those situations. And when they're in the back burner, we don't obsess over it. But when the situation happens and it's in the forefront, we can't help but obsess over it. That makes sense. Sunday's opposition with Saturn means that this emotional thought process is getting in the way of you being able to plan anything. So you've got goals, you've got things you want to do. You're so angry, it's blinding you to being actually able to be focused on that, mentally focused on that, if that makes sense. As we move into Monday, the moon's opposition with Neptune makes this even more interesting because Neptune is focused on right on the cusp of long-term goals and career. So in some cases, it brings that element of career focus into it. I think there's really a couple of interesting things I can tell you about this. One is that when you're faced with a difficulty ever, and you get emotional about it, it really does take your power away to do anything about it. In some cases, the emotion is necessary. Don't get me wrong, but there's a mentality out there in the world, and I'm sure that I even taught you this mentality in some ways. There's this mentality in the world that if something happens, you're supposed to get up and act tough and act like you can whoop somebody's ass, or most people react rudely or wrongly in these situations when a lot of times it's just somebody made a mistake. Yes, it's annoying when somebody continues to make the mistake over and over and over again. That's a pattern. That's a different, you deal with it in a different way. The point is that triggers are emotional reactions that are actually rooted in things that happened before. And to allow the feelings of what happened before to influence what's going on right now doesn't always work. I hope that makes sense. So bottom line is that if you're trying to work through something, or you're trying to plan something, but you're emotional about something, you're just going to keep on sort of pushing this thing away and never getting the answer. You got to deal with what you're angry about. You got to deal with what you're sad about. You got to cry. You got to go in your room and pound your pillow. You got to do whatever you need to do to give that an outlet. And then once you have released that, then you can focus on what you need to focus on. The good news is that the moon's trine with Uranus and Venus on Monday is kind of a helpful aspect because it shows that you have support in what you're going through. And it's actually a very interesting type of support. Uranus is the planet that everybody thinks is fun to say, but it's all about being out of the box. It's all about being different. It's Aquarius's planet. So, it's not following the same structure as everybody else by saying, oh, I have this person, these people who support me in the exact same way that everybody else is supported. No, these are people that support you in your own unique way, in Maddie's way, the way Maddie needs to be supported. And Venus is all about love and all about femininity, actually. And so this beautiful sort of support trine just sort of envelops, if that makes sense. And it actually kind of reminds me of your mom and Aunt Sharon and I, to be honest with you. That was literally what got us through the last 30 years is each other in so many ways. And I'm not saying if you don't have that, you need to go find that. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that you have your own unique individual support system, even if it doesn't look like it sometimes, if that makes sense. As the moon moves out of there, things get a little less emotional and a little less chaotic, which is good. We do continue to have Ceres in Virgo, and Ceres continues to be retrograde in Virgo. So the interesting thing about this is Ceres focus moves into focus on the mind. And if we're retrograding that nurturing quality from Ceres back at us, nurturing your mind is actually really important. And I'm going to say this from an aunt to a niece. It's even more important when you smoke pot, okay? Because seriously, your brain starts to wander away after a while, literally. So it's really important that focus for Ceres is about nurturing your mind. It's about never being in that place where you think you know everything, or you feel like you know enough and you don't have to know anything else, because the truth is that your brain gets lazy and it gets fatty, and just like a heart, it dies if you don't exercise it, basically. So I feel like this is a really good opportunity to focus on that, specifically if you feel like you have foggy brain a lot. Foggy brain is the cause of not using it in terms of using it to figure things out, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you this week. And I am going to move on to Theresa. We have the moon moving into Libra on Tuesday. And in some ways, it's moving into very helpful aspects. Like, for instance, as it moves into your sign on Tuesday, it moves into a grand trine with Pluto, which is right on the cusp of Aquarius, as well as it looks like Venus, which is pretty close to the cusp of Gemini. So we're not just in air signs, we're also bringing the element of these earth signs into this grand trine as well, which is also very helpful. Air signs are really good at coming up with fantastic ideas. We need our earth sign companions to come in and provide a plan on what we're going to do to create this idea, to take this idea and turn it into an actual project and build something. And I feel like this building of something actually comes from a very, very deep place, if that makes sense, a very deep emotional place. But also the moon's focus is on the home. Libra's focus is very much on the home this week. Pluto's focus is on relationships, and Venus's focus is on those that support you. And while the moon is in opposition with Neptune as well as the sun, because we have a full moon coming up, that is going to create a couple of little challenges specifically around your job. But these planets coming together in the midst of this is actually helping you to be able to get over those challenges. So in some cases, I feel like the energy they don't cancel each other out, but it does minimize the challenge in the way, if that makes sense. The other thing that I'm really picking up from you in terms of focus on the home this week and the moon being in there this week, that opposition with the sun and Jupiter continues for a couple of days there, which is a bit of a challenge, and sort of moves into a T-square for a minute there as we bring Pluto into that mix. So we're working with Pluto, and then we're not working with Pluto. It is a little bit crazy. Bottom line, though, is I feel like in some ways there's a bit of a tug of war between your responsibilities to your family and having to go to work. On the other hand, I kind of see this as a growth experience for you. Like, it's not about whether you're responsible to your family or you're responsible to your career or you're responsible to yourself. It is time for you to be responsible for yourself. And whatever that is uber important to you. And if making money is what that is, then it is on your career, establishing yourself in your career, and even moving forward in your career. So I sort of feel like this could be coming from a relationship. This could be coming from your other close family members. It could even be outside in the more extended family members. But it feels more like one of those situations where you're busy, you can't really get to somebody, and that person, is sitting there going, "You never have time for me." I hate that. I hate that when that happens. And your Libra heart is going to be triggered, and you're going to be like, "Oh, I feel so bad. I feel so bad." Sometimes you just can't help it. And it just is what it is. And sometimes you need to tell a person, "I'm not available now, but let's make plans for when I am. And I will sit there and deal with that." And the more you put boundaries on those types of relationships, the easier they do become, if that makes sense. But it is annoying as heck and very heartbreaking sometimes when they are happening. As the moon sort of moves out of there, things do get a little bit less challenging, which is good, because there's a lot of planets for the moon to be in opposition with when it's on this side of the zodiac. All the other planets are on the other side. So it's just a little bit crazy there. And then things sort of smooth out. And actually, you move into this space towards the end of the week where focus is in between focuses, meaning you really don't have anything specific to focus on. And this is awesome when this happens, because you literally go from all of this craziness for 3 days with the moon coming through, and then boom, it's time to relax, put my feet up, and enjoy all of my hard work. So that's good. So that is what I have for you, Theresa. And I'm going to move on to Regina. So we have the moon moving into Scorpio at the very end of the week. Actually, we're just going to end the week with Scorpio, or the moon in Scorpio, I should say. Moving into opposition with Mercury, as well as Uranus, as well as Venus. Mercury, Uranus, and Venus are all focused on your support system. The moon is focused on those you love. This oftentimes creates one of those situations where you need somebody to be there, whether it's to listen, whether it's to help you, whether it's to pick you up from work, whatever. And the person that you think should be doing that is incapable, unreliable, unavailable, can't seem to figure it out, whatever, right? Which is really frustrating. But I also feel that for you, if this is a consistent problem with a specific person, that it could be. But I also feel that this is triggered from something way further back, like childhood issues, where you felt like the right importance wasn't put on you, or you were abandoned in some way, or what have you. And so a couple of interesting things sort of come up with that. One is that it's a good opportunity for you to be able to sit with that and look at it honestly, and be able to identify with, where is this a consistent problem with the person, or is this a trigger for me? Or, you know what, is it both? Because it very well could be both. I think in many cases, when we're supposed to learn something specific, and most of the time we're learning something specific in order to let go of things that are holding us back and move on, those specifics come up for a reason, and they consistently come up for a reason. So we draw relationships with people that have those same problems in order for us to not get away from them. Makes any sense at all. Sounds kind of ridiculous, but it is exactly how it works. So I feel like this situation happening again, as it always does, also gives you an opportunity to sort of take a look at your responsibility in that, and a very honest look at your responsibility in that. That is really hard for most human beings to do, in all honesty. It's taken me many, many, many years to finally succumb to the fact that I'm not perfect and the center of the universe is not me, and I hold my own responsibility in every problem that exists in my life. And but it's when you get to that point that all of a sudden you find the power to change it, and all of the things that get in the way of your ability to change it all of a sudden just disappear, because it turns out we put them there in the first place. And it's really kind of crazy how that works out. So this seems like a little thing that becomes a huge thing, that becomes a monumental, life-changing thing, as each one of these triggers really is. So annoying as they are when we're dealing with them, it is so worth it, because when you get past your own bullshit, and we all have it, there's freedom, there's power, there's unbelievable changes that can be made if we so choose to make those changes. The rest of the week seems to be great. In fact, I really feel, because focus is on those you love, I really feel that there is opportunities to have that time, enjoying time with somebody that you love, whether it's somebody in your family or a good friend of yours, or just something out of the ordinary. I envision it as two girlfriends with some coffee, just laughing and having a great time. And, which is definitely something that charges the energy in a very good way. So I do see that as something that, if you don't have plans, fit in some plans there somewhere if you can. And that is what I have for you, Regina. And I am going to take a little break here because I'm starving. So I'm going to take a little break, and then I'm going to come back to the readings and finish up the rest of them. Okay, moving on to Theresa. We have no planets in Scorpio until the very end of the week, when the moon comes into Scorpio. Unfortunately, creating some chaos. Because all the planets are on that side in opposition of the moon when it's on this side, unfortunately. So a little bit of chaos, a little bit of help, though it's not all bad, which is good. First of all, focus is on those you love this week. Before we get to that whole nonsense with the moon coming in, I feel that's going to play out in a couple of different ways. Either one, you have some time to spend with somebody you haven't been able to spend time with in a while, or one of those people will become prominent in your focus, even if it's not their time, if that makes sense. And I don't see this as being necessarily like the worst possible thing that could happen. I mean, I don't see that the circumstances are like, oh my God, everything's going to fall apart. But at the same time, with ending the week with the moon, and that being a very emotional influence, being focused on those you love, it may not start out that way, but it may sort of end up that way, if that makes sense. And when, of course, we have the moon ruling what's happening, it can become a very emotional experience, unfortunately. The moon's opposition with Mercury, Uranus, and Venus throughout the course of those couple of days does create some challenges there. Any opposition does create a challenge, unfortunately. All three of the other planets are focused on those that love and support you. So this sort of creates that very common situation where the people that you have always been supportive of don't seem to be reciprocating that, especially when you really need it. And yet at the same time, I feel like, at least in my experience with my own life, there have been cases where I felt like that, but really there's nothing that they can do either. I think in some cases, when we get emotionally frustrated, we just sort of focus on anything that we can get irritated about that takes our focus off of what the problem really is, if that makes sense. So it's very important, of course, to watch out for that, so that doesn't wind up in an emotional outburst in the wrong direction, I guess, if that makes sense. For instance, if you're traveling at this time and you're working, you don't want your frustration about what's going on with somebody else to infiltrate what you need to do for work, kind of a thing, which you're usually very good about, of course, but this is one of those situations where it might be difficult and you might need to work a little bit harder, if that makes sense. The good news is the moon's trine with Neptune, and Neptune's very much focused on long-term goals right now. And I feel the other thing about Neptune is it's all about intuition. And when you have those two very emotional planets coming together to work together in some way, specifically, this takes place on Saturday. In some ways, I also sort of take this as it's very important to work through your emotions because your intuition gets blocked by your emotions. And on Friday, the moon is in a grand trine with Mars and Saturn. Mars is really sitting in that let's deal with our old anger place, which is not pleasant and never fun. And wait a minute, these planets are supposed to be working together to help me. In many cases, that is very helpful. It's not pleasant, it's not fun. I just went through something very similar in terms of a huge emotional release in the last couple of days. It was unpleasant as all hell, but on the other side of it, I sort of feel liberated from it. I feel a lot more liberated from the problem than I did before I had the emotional outburst, because I was able to work out and separate what belongs to me versus what belongs to everybody else. And to be able to focus my energy on fixing what I need to fix and not focusing my energy on what everybody else needs to fix, which is the hardest thing for us to do. So there's an element of that in there. Also, Saturn's responsibility towards your long-term goals. This is actually really interesting because, pardon me, I feel like what this lineup is really saying here is that it's really your own trauma, your own emotions, your own everything that's getting in the way of you being able to achieve these goals. And as human beings, we come up with many different reasons why that's everybody else's fault, but those generally, it comes down to those are excuses. And in some cases, yes, you can't because you're taking care of another person. I mean, those things do exist, but more often than not, we're creating obstacles by using these people as excuses, if that makes sense. So there's a very big lesson in this whole moon fiasco that is going on this week. And luckily, well, there may be a little bit of an element going into the next week as far as the moon's influence, but it's over really quick. We'll just put it that way. It's over really quick, and then you can move on into a moon-free week because there really is no planets, even secondary influences, that are even close to moving into Scorpio at this time, which is not a bad thing really when you think about it. So One more thing that I feel is coming up for you this week. There's an opportunity for you to just relax, have fun. And I kind of feel like in your current state, you just don't feel like you want to do that. And your first initial response is going to be to turn it down. I'm being told to tell you, don't turn it down. In a way, this coming in and sort of taking your focus off of these frustrations is really helpful towards you finding a solution to the problem, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you. And I'm going to move on to Jillian. Hi, darling. We have no planets in Scorpio until the very end of the week. Focus is on those you love, which to me is usually your family, those that are closest to you, the family that you're born into, the family that you create, the people that you see and interact with the most, I guess, although that can encompass those that you don't as well. And there's a couple of things actually that sort of come out of this. The first thing is that I feel like you may be in a situation at some point where you feel like you need support from family, you need a listening ear, you need some time. And it's almost like the feeling that I get is that you're not getting it, if that makes sense. And it's not that you're not getting it because nobody cares. It's just like nobody's available. First things first, it's really important to just come out and say, never allude to the fact that you need something, but to come out and say, I need to talk. Can you schedule me some time this week to talk, because I have a problem and I need to talk it through in order to come up with a solution, if that makes sense. The more clear your communication is, the better. If you sort of throw a fishing hook out there, 9 times out of 10, they don't catch it. Or in some cases, I am, and I think John is too, actually, and Daniel definitely is, one of those people who sees the fishing and doesn't take it on purpose, because I want you to come and say, Auntie, this is what I need, right? So if you need somebody to listen, tell them. You get much better results that way if you do that. And it'll make things easier once the moon comes in at the end of the week, because the moon is moving in to Scorpio on Friday in a T-square. So this is an opposition, and these two planets that are in opposition are squared with another planet. It makes this big old triangle that's a big old challenge. We're going to start that off with the moon being in opposition with Mercury, and both planets being squared with Pluto, which creates this T-square. Pluto's focus is on relationships. Mercury's focus is on those that support you. And Mercury is all about communication. So when you get to this point where you need something, and you can't just scream at somebody and go, hey, I need you right now, you better do as I say, that also doesn't really go over very well, right? It's all about how you communicate it in terms of how people respond to what it is that you're saying. The good news is that the moon moves into a grand trine, which is a much more helpful aspect with Saturn as well as Mars. Now, this is where it gets a little weird and tricky, because Mars has been focused on inner trauma. It's past anger is what it is, from childhood, from something that happened before, right? And what we humans do is we take all those little traumas over the course of our lives and we build them up and put them in the secret closet that's inside of us somewhere around the stomach. If you're having a lot of stomach problems, that's usually why. And then we hold them up and use them as excuses why we can't get along with other people, kind of a thing. This situation, the moon lining up with Mars, definitely looks like an explosion, an emotional explosion waiting to happen. But when you have that explosion, and sometimes it's better to have it by yourself, when you have that explosion, it sort of frees up the anger, and you can look at the situation in a different way, more black and white way. And it's very common for most of us. We all do it. You've probably seen me do it. You've seen everybody you know do it. They have a problem and they blame somebody else. It's always somebody else's fault. The truth, the honest truth, nobody that was ever successful got there because they blamed everybody else for their problems. It's as simple as that. No matter how much we want to try and change that, it's not going to change. Our mindset is everything, and we put up obstacles faster than other people do. The other problem with that is that if it's everybody else's fault, we have no power to change it. It's a good excuse why we just stay where we are. Staying where you are, it just doesn't work out for you. So if you need to talk to somebody, anybody, all you have to do is say, I need to talk. I have a problem and I need to vent, or I'm so angry I can't take this anymore. I just need somebody to listen to me. If you did that at me, I would say, here's the time that I have for you to listen to whatever that is. I would definitely do that for you. As we move into Saturday, the moon continues to be in opposition with Mercury as well as Uranus, and a little bit into Venus there also. So that continues to be a challenge. That support system is not coming from the people that it should be coming from. But sometimes that happens. And that's why you have to broaden out your support system just a little bit. I think it's also a good idea in most cases for most people, regardless of their level of mental health issues, reaching out into a support group of people that you don't know is scary, but it's helpful as well, because this is sort of a safe place where you don't know these people. So it doesn't matter how they're going to react, to be able to kind of put a voice to what the problem is, and then sort of be able to release it and kind of move on, if that makes sense. If that's something that you're even remotely interested in. And I'm getting this thought that you've already been there and done that, but this is in a different context. So don't automatically poo-poo it, because it looks like something you've done before. There are various different levels of it, if that makes sense. The other thing that I'm being shown for you, after I get some coffee. The other thing that I'm being shown for you this week is okay, this doesn't make any sense because I know how the weather has been, although this is next week. So maybe this means it's gonna clear up a little bit. I don't know, but I mean, I see you riding a bike and it's like so freeing, like finally you're out of the house, or finally you can get away and you can travel somewhere and you can do something. And this is something that's you, it's on your own. It just, there's so much freedom watching you ride this bike. And I don't even think that you're actually riding a bike necessarily, or this means that you have to get a bike and start riding it. It's more of just escaping in a way. It's freedom, if that makes sense. Take that however you want to take that. I'm also being shown your dad holding the bike. So kind of like he was teaching you how to ride a bike. But I think that's also his way of saying that even if you're by yourself, you're never by yourself, if that makes sense. And that's what I have for you, darling. And I am going to move on to Sheri. So we just barely get like end the week with the moon in Scorpio. So woo for you. There's no moon in Sagittarius. Good for you. It seems to be a nightmare for everybody else. So you can have that nightmare next week. Well, in fact, we're pretty much going to have that nightmare pretty early on in the week. Allergies have already started. Already started. I mean, come on. It's like almost April, for God's sake. They should have started a month ago, really, but anyways, they're starting now, and that's the point. Focuses on your day-to-day schedule this week. I sort of get this feeling that it's just it's those times where you just get sick of being the one that's in charge of everything, or the one that has to deal with this crap or whatever. I mean, I sort of feel something along those lines coming up for you this week. And I don't see it necessarily around your dad. It's sort of like the quintessential there you are sitting there about to clean the house, looking at it going, why the hell am I always picking up after? Why do I have to clean this up? But it's not cleaning the house. It's like a problem that somebody else created that Sheri's got to clean up, kind of a thing. It's sort of frustrating. I see something similar to that or something like that coming up this week. If I'm not mistaken, last week something came up with someone in particular, and I'm not sure if that's a backlash from that, or if it's a continuance of that, if that makes sense, or if it's not that one but the other one, because it's highly possible as well. So that's one thing. The other thing is it's like I can hear you in my head. Like, you always know when I giggle or something, you're gonna get it or something like that. But that's not true. It's like your mom is showing me the steps that you take in here to justify your actions or your behavior or all of the above or what have you. And it literally starts and it just just goes in the same loop, right? And I think that the reason she's showing me that is because what she's saying about it is that that's what's comfortable for you. You know that if you start that process, it'll go in the same direction every single time. And it always has the same result, which is that Sheri can do whatever Sheri wants, right? Makes total sense. I totally get it. But, and this is not just about drinking either, okay? There's a lot of times this happens, okay? And it really has to do with the word justifying whatever you need to justify in the moment. And that's why you do it, because it's comfortable. There's always the same outcome. And because there's always the same outcome, it's a comfort thing to you. It's almost like a security blanket to go through this process. But she says that she's also seeing that you're going through a different process. You have been going through a different process, and you know that you're choosing which process to go to. It's really hard to hide our bullshit from people when they die. You can see all of it now. They're just like, you can't lie to me no more, child. She loves it, by the way. She is like, I got you, right? God, I miss her. Anyways, yes. It's what it comes down to. It's a comfort thing. You have to get out of your comfort zone in order to change, obviously. And it's not to say that you can't choose your comfort zone every now and then, but she is advising that maybe it's a good idea to make sure, think about whether or not these justifications are going to work out to the benefit of everybody or just to Sheri's benefit, or just Sheri's temporary feeling in the moment. So there you have it. So that's what I have for you, Sheri. And I am moving on to Peg. We have no planets in Sagittarius. The moon actually ends in Scorpio this week. So you guys got lucky this week, not so much next week. First of all, so no planets to influence, that's good. Focus is on your day-to-day schedule this week. Actually, that sounds kind of boring. Specifically this week, it sounds kind of boring. And I actually really feel like this sort of restlessness, like you just need something different. Like you just need to get out, like you just, it's, it's a restlessness. And while I feel like this is a typical Sagittarian restlessness, I mean, I see you go through it, every now and then, but it just seems to be particularly bad right now. And so with this taking place, I don't know if you actually can do anything about this restlessness in terms of being stuck at home and snowy roads and all that stuff. But if you can't, it's a good idea to make some plans of things to do when you can, because if you have those plans put in place ahead of time, you're not wasting any time planning it later, if that makes sense. You just pick a date, and on that date you go. And I see visions and dreams of tropical paradise, if that makes sense, which could be because winter has seemed to feel like it is going on forever. I don't know if it's like that over there. It definitely is over here, and I understand that it's backlashing to everywhere else. But I really feel that this may be something that you've been thinking about for a long time and wanting to put this together and worrying about having the money to do it and whether you have the time to do it. I think it's just a good idea to start planning it now. If you don't plan it, it never happens. And you don't have to plan it for a month from now. Even if you plan it for a couple of years from now, you're at least putting towards that goal, if that makes sense, which of course is really the only thing that the only way that anything ever gets done, if that makes sense. The other thing that's coming up for you this week is I feel that I know that you have a lot of diet restrictions these days, and I feel like this week is one of those weeks, or you'll have one of those days where it's really hard to say no to bread or sugar or something that you used to love that you really miss, if that makes sense. And I'm also being told to tell you that the times that you have said, to heck with it, I'm just going to do it, you kind of regret it. Like, it's either painful or, it just doesn't agree with your stomach or whatever. And so your guys are just kind of sort of there saying, keep that in mind. while you're convincing yourself that it's okay to have that one cookie, knowing that it isn't okay to have that one cookie because you're going to pay for it for the rest of the day. And that's just never a pleasant experience. But I am also being shown that you have gotten really creative with coming up with alternatives that work most of the time. We can't expect them to work all of the time, but they do a pretty good job most of the time. So maybe, I mean, obviously go towards one of those options instead. It's not quite as good, but it is definitely better for you. I also need to tell you to be very careful on steps, specifically icy steps. And I'm specifically being shown you with lots of things in your arms, like you're carrying a whole bunch of stuff, trying to make that one trip. That may not be a good idea for you because I'm seeing icy steps, very easy to fall, especially if you can't see where you're going. Break it down into 2, maybe even 3. Trips back and forth if you're unloading or loading the car instead of trying to get it all in one swoop. It's just a little too dangerous to do that. So that's what I have for you. And I am moving on to Mama Sheri. We have no planets in Sagittarius this week, and that will change next week with the moon coming in to cause a little bit of chaos. Because not a lot of chaos actually, but maybe a little bit. Focus is on your day-to-day schedule this week. It's a couple of things that are actually coming up for you. I kind of feel this struggle between filling your schedule with readings and struggling to maintain control of your time, if that makes sense, which you know how to be able to balance out both. And we always convince ourselves of bullshit. So when you know you're doing that, you know what to do about that also. And I'll just leave it at that. The other thing that I'm picking up for this week is I want to say it's either a surprise visit or a phone call from someone you haven't connected with in a really long time. There's some sort of, wow, I haven't been able to talk to this person or see this person in a really long time sort of connection, if that makes sense. And it's a really good one also. It's not somebody that you're like, oh God, not this person. I hate those. It's not like that. It's more of a this is a visit, the type of visit that you've been waiting for a long time. We'll put it that way. Lots of fun. Lots of laughing. Definitely a really good opportunity to just kind of disconnect from all the other stuff, especially the stuff that goes on in your head. I think that sometimes, and I know you know this, spending too much time alone isn't good because you wind up spending too much time in your head, and that's not always a fun place to be. It can be a very destructive place to be in some cases for some people. So even if you're not physically seeing people, to have I mean, like you do with Kim, regular chats throughout the day really does help because it keeps you sort of out of your head. And I feel like just lately being in your head is really bothering you, or it's really scary, it's a really scary place. There's something about it that, yes, you need to work through it, but you also need to stop focusing on it so much, by giving yourself other things to focus your mind on, if that makes sense. So that's what I have for you. And last, we are moving on to Alyssa. We have Neptune in Pisces. We have Saturn in Pisces. We have Saturn in an opposition with the moon right off the bat at the beginning of the week. Focus is on your long-term goals. It's also a little bit on finances as well. Specifically your long-term financial goals. Saturn's all about your own responsibility to these goals. And from woman to woman, that really is important, actually. It's really kind of interesting how I've told every niece, every young lady, every woman I've ever talked to, I've ever connected with, I've ever worked with, don't ever put yourself in the position to financially rely on another person. Because there are a million different reasons why that's not going to work out, right? And they could be the most trustworthy person in the world. So it's always a really good idea to make sure that you can financially take care of you. And everybody else can do whatever they need to do, if that makes sense. As long as they're taking care of their responsibilities to you, that's all that counts. With Saturn being in opposition with the moon right off the bat, the moon's focus is on the mind and it's emotional, and you're a Pisces, so you know all about this. In a way, it's sort of your head convincing you in an emotional way why you can't take charge of your responsibilities to your financial goals. We can come up with a million excuses. We always are really good at coming up with a million excuses. And this is exactly one of those classic cases of that. You need to be aware of where your mind is constantly going to these negative places, or these excuse places, or these overly emotional places, because it's not going to help you get to where you need to go. And the moon coming in specifically for that reason at this time is sort of reminding you of that, if that makes sense. Neptune is the planet of intuition, and in a grand sextile for most of the week with Pluto and Mercury, as Mercury moves into Taurus. And we do have a Mercury retrograde coming up, but we have a couple more weeks. So we're not quite in like shadow period danger here, but we're sort of getting there, if that makes sense. So, but let's not think about that yet. Okay. The point is that Neptune's focus on your long-term goals and your career, your long-term career goals, is what's going to help you obviously structure your financial goals as well, because you need to be in the right place to make the money in order to achieve those things, right? Or get the education you need to do what you need to do, all the stuff, right? It all falls into place, right? And the bottom line is, it's whether or not we choose to take the plunge and get it done depends on how successful we are, right? Pluto's focus is on relationships, and Mercury's focus is on career and your support system. So it kind of moves throughout the week. And bottom line is that you have all the support that you need in order to move forward in your goals. You always have. Granted, they're not always going to be able to drop everything whenever you need it. It's not really realistic to think that way, but you have a massive support system, and you can rely on that support system when you absolutely need it. And every time you try to convince yourself that you don't, it's almost like it presents itself in a way that's happening on purpose, if you're noticing that, by the way. We have no moon coming into Pisces this week, so that's good. We can just avoid having to deal with any of that. The moon does come in to opposition with Neptune, as well as, well, no, we already covered that. The moon comes into opposition with Neptune on Monday. So we continue with those oppositions right at the beginning of the week. the moon continues to be on how you think about things, and Neptune's focus is on your long-term goals, your long-term career goals. So again, manifestation is all about seeing a clear picture of what you want to, where you want to be, and what do you need to do to get there. When you start thinking about, will you have time? Do I have support? Is this going to take up my whole life? What if I fail? That emotional thought process gets in the way of your manifestation, and therefore you wind up pretty much nowhere, and you don't want to do that. So just be really mindful of that. That's why that's coming up specifically for you. So outside of that, it's a really good time to focus on your long-term goals, your career goals, your responsibility to your own goals. I kind of see this playing out for you in a really exciting way. Once you get past the, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this place, it's really exciting. And I really see you putting nose to the grind and really just making some magic out of whatever this is. So that's what I have for you this week. And that's what I have for everybody this week. Thanks for coming and hanging out and checking out the readings for the week. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. It is completely in your power to make it a great week. So I expect that you all make it a great week, and I will see you next week.